Hello, it's Dr. White back to review chapters 7 and 8 with you. This is going to be kind of a quick overview. Chapter 7 really focused in on intersectionality, and then chapter 8 talked about different settings. Chapter 8 was a little short. Chapter 7 was a little bit longer, but it basically talked about the same concept just with different populations. So the thing that I want you to take away from chapter 7 is the term intersectionality and the importance of us understanding what intersectionality is. Now, the reason that we use this term is basically so that students, counselors, etc., understand the complex nature of what culture is. It's like, how do our cultures overlap and make us individuals, but also make us part of groups? One of the things that I often see in the reflection assignments from students who identify as white or European ancestry is they don't feel like they have a culture. And I've seen that, for years in numerous papers, and this is where that intersectionality kind of comes into play. It's like thinking about any culture, whether you live in the Appalachian Mountains, that's its own culture, combined with gender, combined with orientation, combined with race, and that is its own subset of different cultures and how they intertwine and connect you to other cultures. So for instance, I identify as female and I live in or near Nashville, Tennessee. But somebody who lives in California who identifies as female might have some of the same experience as me. Maybe when they're 30 in our culture, they're feeling pressure to be married or to have kids. But then also maybe this female is African American and I am white. So there we have very different experiences in our culture. So yes, we have some components that are similar, but then we have others that are not similar or have different experiences. And this is kind of what intersectionality is about. It's saying, yes, there are these overlaps that people share, but then there's these also other components, and I can't just take one piece of myself out. Like how I view the world, I oftentimes think of culture as like my cultural lens. Here's my glasses, these are the lens of how I view the world. And that is all pieces of me, because I was born in the late 70s, because I'm female, because I'm white, because of my socioeconomic status and my religion and my orientation and my ability status. All of those things combined together is what makes up my worldview. If you changed one of those, so say at birth I was born a male, I identified as male throughout my life, that is going to change. Even if all those other things stay the same, it would still change my experience and my worldview. So this is to help people really consider, from a counseling perspective, one of the ways I use it is I really consider different forms of oppression. So say, for instance, I have a client who identifies as African American, also identifies as queer or gay, and then is a female. That person is experiencing 3 different levels of oppression based on their identity, which would be very different from somebody who is African American, identifies as male, and identifies as heterosexual. Yes, they share that African American experience possibly, but there's a difference in gender and there's a difference in orientation. So that person would only experience oppression on possibly one level. So we have to think about how our different identities either give us more barriers or provide more opportunities for us and our clients and our colleagues, etc. And then how that impacts life. How does that impact stress? How does that impact access to resources? And this can be everything from geographical location to language to, all of the different components that kind of come into culture. I tend to go back to thinking about the addressing and the respectful frameworks. So you're going to think age, disability status or ability status, sexual orientation, gender identity, those sorts of things, nationality, sometimes family dynamics and threat to self or trauma can come in there, location, and that can mean geographical. That also impacts maybe education, that might impact language, etc. Immigration status, nationality. So maybe I can be completely different from another person. Say it's an African American gay male who is very wealthy. So I differ in all of those, but we were both born in America. We both have some American privilege. So maybe that's one thing that can kind of unite us. So sometimes we can use these different components to not only discover who the person is as a whole instead of just looking at one component, but also finding things that we can align with. So that's kind of the takeaways from chapter 7. Chapter 8 talks a lot about what settings counselors can work in, and it just kind of gives an overview of each of those settings. And this can impact greatly who your clientele is. And I will say, maybe there was a few that weren't discussed or weren't pointed out in this chapter. So some of the ones that were talked about were school counselors, which, no one in my class is in the school counseling track, but I know that some people will be school-based. So now schools are hiring mental health counselors to come in and take some of that mental health load from the school counselors or clients who need maybe more intense services. So there are a lot of people who are going to have to understand even that school culture and the expectations within the school, etc. The chapter talked about college counselors, which obviously is going to be very different than if you are a school-based counselor of third graders. A college counselor, you're going to deal maybe with a different population as far as academic ability, as far as maybe socioeconomic status, and depending on which university. Is it a Christian university? Is it a public university or a private university, etc.? So that could change the population of who you're working with as well. The next one it talked about was private practice, and there you're going to have typically clients who have private insurance or who pay out of pocket, who have a lot different resources than what oftentimes the community mental health clients will have. Sometimes community mental health centers are on their location is located like near a bus system or near high need populations. For instance, I worked at a place in Knoxville, and the location was where we call near the bridge. And there's a huge homeless population that kind of used to live in this particular area, this bridge area. And there was a church and a shelter and everything that was nearby, which was great for resources as far as these particular clients because they could walk in for services. A lot of times they would we'd give shots for like psychotic medication on Thursdays. So like Thursdays, a huge different population would be in the office compared to other days. And your private practice isn't necessarily always going to look like that. I mean, it's not always higher functioning, but sometimes you just have a different clientele, especially if you specialize in a particular area. So maybe if you're doing family counseling or marriage counseling, those sorts of things tend to oftentimes be in private practice and oftentimes not even take insurance. So they're going to have clients with a different socioeconomic status. And with that can come a different level of education and other components. I talked a little bit already about community mental health, but then it also talked about some specialty areas like the legal system or the government and military. And if you think about it, like the military is its own culture completely. The experiences that they even have their own language, acronym for everything. And if you're not kind of in the whether that's through marriage or through service yourself, sometimes you can really be seen as an outsider or somebody who doesn't understand because you're a civilian. So if you were working with one of those special populations, whether it be people incarcerated in the legal system or maybe even the military, it's really important to be learning about that culture and how those intersect with other cultures and some of the experiences specific to those populations. Other one that it talked about was career counseling. And this can be popular maybe during a recession. I noticed years ago I was working in a community-based clinic, and all of a sudden we started seeing a ton of different population of clients. And we had clients who tended to be more educated but were unemployed because it was the time of a recession. So they were coming in like, I don't know what to do, I've lost my job, or I've been laid off, etc. So they were coming in for more career counseling, some mental health because there was some depression and some anxiety and some relational stressors with finances, etc. But a lot of it was very career based, which we hadn't received previously. And then there's some places that are just set up for career counseling. They do a lot of career testing, and maybe helping people get job placements. And it's part of that is knowing the resources in the community for that as well. Maybe working with the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation, etc. And then the last one it talked about was religious settings. I know a lot of churches bring in mental health professionals, but there's also people who identify as a particular religion and only want to work with clients in that area. And some states you require, like in the state of Tennessee, we have a pastoral counselor's license that is different from a licensed professional counselor, but you could still focus on Christian clients and be a licensed professional counselor as long as that was discussed in the informed consent and talked about with the clients. But again, that's going to really hone in on a particular clientele. So just being really aware of that. I would say some other specific groups are LGBT. I know that in a lot of the places where counselors can kind of promote themselves, they are asked to state whether they are affirming or non-affirming, meaning supporting an LGBT population, etc. Another area of expertise might be considered addictions counseling, whether you have an addiction certificate or addiction license in your state, being a LADAC or certified in the state, had additional training in that area. So that might be another area of specialty that didn't have like a complete section in the book, but it is something to think about because oftentimes they think of themselves as their own culture, the 12-step culture, the recovery culture, those sorts of things. And there are experiences, sometimes that overlaps with the legal system as well. So maybe it's just kind of thrown in under that one. But remembering that each setting kind of brings about different populations. So you might have worked with adolescents in a residential treatment center for 10 years, and then you move and all of a sudden now you're working with adult in private practice. That's going to be a very different cultural experience, not only how they talk and dress and just life experiences and some of the stressors that population would be discussing as well. So when you're thinking about your setting and where you're going to work, making sure that you're taking into consideration the culture of the different clientele. So that's kind of your quick and dirty overview of chapter 7 and 8. So remember to think about intersectionality and the complexity of the people that we work with, but also who we are, and dissecting our own complexity. Where did we get these beliefs about our religion, about ability status, about age, about gender? Where did all of this kind of come from for us? And maybe why we're holding on to some of those beliefs. And part of that is kind of dissecting who we are and how our different pieces intersect. I guess I should have said that when I was reviewing the first one. And the other one is just think about your settings. If you have questions, you can always email me, and I'll see you soon.